what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, this could certainly be interesting. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justin Peters. I hope that this finds you and your family doing well today. I want to thank you so much for joining me. So I believe it was yesterday when I started seeing stuff about this that some guy had presented the gospel, or at least talked about the bodily resurrection of Jesus to Joe Rogan. Now, I don't really swim in those circles. I know Joe Rogan is a big name in the podcast world. And in fact, I think he may have the biggest audience of any podcast. I could be wrong with that, but I think he may have the largest. So millions and millions of people follow him. Of course, he made some news here in the recent election cycle because he came out in support of Donald Trump, but he's got an enormous following. And I do know that Joe Rogan is an unbeliever. He's not a Christian. I've never watched his podcast, like not ever, not a single time. I've never seen an entire program. I've just seen a few snippets from a few, and I do mean like count them on one hand, few programs. But I did catch a little bit of this one. And Christians are, understandably so, very excited about this, that apparently finally, like a real Christian made it onto the Joe Rogan podcast and actually talked about the real Jesus. And indeed, that does appear to be what has happened. So now this Christian is a man named Wes Huff. I had never heard of Wes Huff until about 24 hours ago as of this recording. But from what I can tell, I mean, just briefly, he seems to be a real believer. He is a Christian apologist who lives up in Canada. And now, in fairness, I don't know much about him, so I'm not like giving a blanket endorsement or anything like that. I just don't know enough one way or the other. I've been told by a friend of mine that he does hold to the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, which that's a good sign. So he does appear to be a genuine believer. What church he's a part of, I don't know those details. But I do want to talk about this a little bit because several things several biblical truths here come colliding in this podcast, this interview that Joe Rogan did with Wes Huff. And towards the end of this video, I'm also going to talk a little bit about Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson's name was raised in this interview as well. And so I want to help us kind of walk through some things and bring out some biblical truths here. So I'm going to play a few clips here from this interview, and here is the first one. And from time to time, I will interrupt and we'll talk about it. So away we go.
Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like there's something different that goes on there, that they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Now, I'm really glad that Joe asked that question, because this gets down to the theological brass tacks, does it not? So liberal theologians, they would say, oh, the Bible is a wonderful book, yes, and we believe the Bible, but it's not really important, you see, whether or not the stories that are found in the Bible actually happened. What's important, you see, is this moralistic tale, this morality tale that they represent to us today. So in other words, it doesn't really matter if Adam and Eve were actual historical people. It doesn't really matter if Noah's Ark was a real thing and God really flooded the earth. That's not really what matters. And it's not even really all that important whether Jesus was born of a virgin, or it's not important if Jesus was actually bodily raised from the dead. That's not really the point of these stories. The point is this morality tale that we can somehow divine from these stories, and we learn some life lesson about these things. So the historicity is not what's important. It's just a morality tale, kind of like just a really special version of Aesop's fables, that kind of thing. I'm really glad that Joe asked this question. I'm also really glad that he asked this question to someone who is biblically and theologically equipped to answer it, because it absolutely does matter whether or not Jesus was bodily raised from the dead.
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out, literally the end.
Yeah.
The last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
Joe is right. From a purely secular, materialistic worldview, then the resurrection of Jesus Christ does present a bit of a dilemma, does it not? Because if Jesus was bodily raised from the dead, I mean, that doesn't happen, okay? The resurrection of Jesus is not a resuscitation. It's not like Jesus fell through the ice of a frozen lake and his, he quit breathing for 5 minutes and they were able to revive him. No, he was bodily dead, laid in the tomb, and on the third day walked out of the tomb. Yes, so Joe is right. That doesn't happen. People don't come back to life after having been dead for multiple days. It does not happen. So if Jesus was raised from the dead, then he was who he claimed to be, God in human flesh. And if he is God in human flesh, then he has a claim on our lives. More on that in just a moment.
Okay, look, I'm going to go back to what I always say, okay? Justin Peters is one of the guy that got to know about these things, the scriptures. I do not understand why he's still calling him God when he know that God is really not a name. God is not a name. Lord is not a name. Jesus is not the name. Why is Justin Peters still using that? Another thing that I was going to point out, Justin Peters, why do you have this spinning earth ball behind you? Why do you have that though? If you know the scriptures, you know that it literally said he set the foundation of the earth. Okay, he set the foundation so it will not be moved. So we all know that the earth is not spinning. We know that it's not round. We know that there's no space. So you have all these balls behind you. I do not understand. I do not comprehend. Why? Why? You know the scriptures. You know, yes. Why do you have this? Why? You know there's a firmament. You know that. You know there are waters above the firmament. You know that. Why do you have this?
And I get that, but we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on for. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things.
Wes here is right. The bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ is the most well-attested event in all of ancient history, and the Bible is the most well-attested work of literature in all of ancient history. Nothing else even comes close. The Bible is literally light years ahead of every other work of ancient literature in its manuscript attestation. Nothing else, there is no close second, like at all. You think of maybe like the Iliad and the Odyssey that were written, these poems that were written by the Greek poet Homer. And I think we have like 10 or 12 manuscripts of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the oldest manuscripts are hundreds of years after the original was written. You compare that, if not close to 1,000 years, you compare that to the New Testament alone, we have thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament. Some of these manuscripts go back to within a few decades of the life of Christ. And you put these manuscripts together and they match perfectly. I mean, of course, there's little variance in here and there, but you put them together and you compare them, and then you can get back to the original, what the originals were. And so when you can have 100% confidence that what you are holding in your hand as the Bible, and provided that you are looking at a legitimate translation, not the Message or something like that, but it's a real translation. This is the Word of God, and we can get back to the originals. And these events, yes, you had eyewitnesses of the resurrection when these manuscripts were being circulated. And so, yes, the bodily resurrection of Christ is like ironclad when it comes to its historical evidence.
How do you
So,
fact check someone coming back from the dead?
well,
How many people saw his body, right?
Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion.
No, saw the resurrected
resurrection.
Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once.
So I want to pause here. I'm not sure why he said 400. And he said this a couple of different times, not only this point in the interview, but also a few minutes later in the interview, he reiterated it. I'm not sure why he said 400, but let's look at this real quickly. 1 Corinthians 15, beginning in verse 3. And
I was going to say that I read it. I did not see 400. Maybe it is in it. Maybe it is something that's got to be a clue somewhere, but I did not see 400. Let's watch.
And by the way, this is probably like an early statement of faith of the church, the early church. So this, of course, 1 Corinthians 15, written by the Apostle Paul to the church of Corinth. Paul says, beginning verse 3, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep." So, Paul, I don't know why he kept saying 400. I mean, it's not a big deal, but
Wes Huff got some explanation to do. I mean, we all make mistakes, like I said, but Wes Huff made too many mistakes. Okay, my opinion, and for what I know, from what this told me, Wes Huff guy is not legit. It's not legit. Okay, I don't know why he said 400. I was just thinking that I did not see 400.
Jesus appeared to 500 brothers at one time. And notice what Paul says too. He says, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. So by the time when Paul wrote this, most of those 500 people were still alive. Some died, group of 500, you would imagine there was probably some of those folks were old and they died. So this is very, very early material. Paul wrote 1 Corinthians about the year AD 53, early AD 50s. And so this is early material. This goes back to just within a couple of decades of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So yeah, most of those were still alive. They were still around. So this is incredible attestation to the bodily resurrection of Jesus.
I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only Messianic.
Dude, I hate that name, man. I hate that name. Stop using that name. Use his name, bro. Use his name.
Figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
I'm actually glad that Wes brought that up because he's exactly right. Jesus was not the first man claiming to be the promised Messiah, and he was certainly not the first religious leader to come down the pike and cause a stir. In fact, such a thing is even referenced in Acts chapter 5. You remember in Acts 5, Peter and the apostles had been warned by the Pharisees not to preach in the name of Jesus, but they had to obey God rather than man. So they continued to preach in the name of Christ. You know, they were thrown into prison and God delivered them out of prison. So really causing a stir in Jerusalem. And so the Pharisees got together to have a little meeting, to have a little powwow to try to decide what to do about these meddlesome Christians. And Gamaliel stands up. He stands up. Acts chapter 5, let's look at this real quickly. And he, Gamaliel, said to them, "Men of Israel, take care what you propose to do with these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a group of about 400 men joined up with him." In fact, I wonder, maybe that's why. Maybe Wes got his addresses crossed. Maybe this is where he's getting the 400. I don't know. But anyway, no big deal. But he was killed, and all who were following him were dispersed and came to nothing. After this man, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census, drew away some people after him. He too perished, and all those who were following him were scattered. So even the Pharisee Gamaliel mentioned two other religious leaders, Judas the Galilean and Theudas. Both of them were basically kind of religious flashes in the pans. They came up and they caused a little stir, and Gad had a little following to gather and followed them for a little while, but then they died and their followers just scattered. Not Jesus. Not Jesus. Jesus did die, but he was raised from the dead.
Okay, that's it for me, man. That's it for me. We've been talking about the same thing for like 15, 16 minutes. I'm good, man. I'm good. You guys want to watch it, make sure to check out Justin Peters' YouTube channel. The link is at the top of the description. Shout out to anybody out there that's shining the light on the truth. Make sure to get the scriptures, read, do not stop reading. You get what I'm saying? Shout out to everybody. I mean, everybody that is going after the truth. But seek ye first the kingdom of Yah and his righteousness and all these things shall be added unto you. You get what I'm saying? Thank you for watching. I'm out. Yes, sir.